Okay, so part two, we're looking at the third mini debate that we're going to have in this essay, which is really the amount of power that the cabinet could have over the prime minister, which, of course, if it does have a lot of power in terms of curtailing or checking the executive power of the prime minister, then that would mean that it had an important role. Well, we could say on the one hand that actually it does have power, and we've seen that for instance, Margaret Thatcher at the end, where the decision to go into the leadership election race was determined by the attitude of the cabinet. Of course, the resignation of Geoffrey Howe played a key role in helping to sow the seeds of her demise right at the end. We have When we have very public resignations and open condemnation of a prime minister's actions, that can have a key impact in weakening prime ministerial power. So we saw, for instance, Robin Cook, John Denham resigning over Iraq. We also had the Works and Pensions Secretary resigning from the cabinet under Brown, demanding that Brown stand down to give Labour a chance of winning in the election, which weakened Brown's position as well. So they can have quite an impact in these areas. And of course, when there is a weak majority, as we saw under Theresa May already, the cabinet has a lot more power over the prime minister, and we've already seen that importance that Theresa May put onto cabinet collective responsibility and the need to have the cabinet on side in order to try and get her EU deal through. However, don't forget that the cabinet is also at the mercy of the patronage powers of the prime minister. They can, of course, be sacked and they can be reshuffled out of a cabinet very easily. Very early on, Tony Blair got rid of Frank Field when he was off message with government policy. May, July 2016, used her patronage powers to do a wholesale reorganisation of the cabinet, which left only 4 of the original members in place. The Prime Minister has prerogative powers not enjoyed by Cabinet. One of those is patronage that we've just talked about. Another one would be, for example, signing treaties. And we know that Tony Blair, a good example of Cabinet being sidelined, was over the Iraq War, when Tony Blair did not apparently consult the Cabinet enough about that decision to go to war and in Iraq. So what sort of conclusions could we reach? Well, we've had some nice analytical points as we've gone through, and it's very clear that the power of the cabinet within the executive does change according to the circumstances. If there's a united party, ideologically united, for instance, under Tony Blair, the cabinet is unlikely to challenge the prime minister, and in the situation, for instance, with Blair or with Thatcher, the strong parliamentary position of the party means that the prime minister can really act without having the full weight of cabinet support behind them. Whereas, of course, what we saw under Theresa May was that she needed the power of the support of the cabinet. And during the coalition, the cabinet also came into its own in terms of having a much more important role in the executive. We could also add to this another fact, which is really the style and the personality of the prime ministers. So we can see, for instance, that Margaret Thatcher very much put herself at the centre of the system and made herself, rather than herself with the cabinet, an important part of the system. Whereas John Major sought debate and discussion and wanted to involve the cabinet a lot more, although of course that did not work out well because of the divisions within his cabinet. The important thing, of course, is that you decide one way or another and whether the cabinet is an important part of the executive or not, and that you come back to that same conclusion throughout your essay and that you restate it in your conclusion. So just to remind you of the overall structure there. There should be no surprises by the time you get to your conclusion.